I'm going to be respectful of everybody's time here, and you got it? Sweet. All right.
Good boy.
So what we're talking about now is we're back in the cosmological argument, and what our atheist friend here was saying, if God made the universe, who made God? So, as I said, this is a commonly made argument. Kids are going to bring this up, when those 100 why questions you get every evening before you're about to put them to bed. Why is the sky blue? Why is blue blue? Why are you blue? Because I'm a Smurf. And this is what I'm talking about. We're going to get into science. You don't have to agree with science, but we're going to be able to learn its methodologies so we can use it in argumentation. So science states that the universe has expanded from a point that we all know is the Big Bang. And it's been proved by the redshifting of stars, the detection of galaxies further away moving faster, and the second law of thermodynamics, which states things move from a state of order to a state of disorder. What that means in the universe is anything that has a high concentration of energy is going to dissipate through time. So if the idea that the universe was an infinite universe, all the energy in the universe would have already long since fizzled out and fizzled away. And if you remember E equals mc squared, that also means all material would have fizzled away too. And the cosmic microwave background radiation, that's a lot of the astronomical work that's been done, where we can see, that's the furthest back we can see in time using our scientific instruments to try to confirm the theory. And that's one of the things we're going to cover in scientism classes, is a lot of science is just explaining theory and then building the theory upon that and explaining that. So is it the ultimate truth? Actually, no, it's not. We have an ultimate truth in God, and we will learn how to make that point. So, and Mr. Hovind brought this up, even asked the question of who makes God assumes atheism. And this is what we're talking about with presuppositions, and Rod exactly brought that up perfectly and hammered the point home. We all approach everything in life with a certain set of presuppositions. We're Christians, we presume that a infinite and perfectly good and perfectly powerful God created the universe. But if you even have to ask that question, that assumes that this is not the God that we're talking about. God is necessary, not contingent. The difference between necessary and contingent, we're going to have to, this is a new vocabulary that we're going to have to really soaking in. Necessarily means it could not be any other way. It is only that way. Contingent means it can be some other way. So,
option.
Yeah, you cannot be anybody else other than Rod, but you can be any player when you're playing Monopoly. You can be the hat, or you can be the dog, or something.
Also my husband and the grandfather, father.
Yeah, well, now that you've got kids, you can't be anything other than that.
I could be a great grandfather.
Indeed, you could be. There's certain necessary things that have yet to happen, which is, I don't want to get down that philosophical rabbit trail there. So it's philosophically inescapable that something has always existed. To prove at some point that there was nothing existing there are some really thinly stretched philosophical arguments to try to prove that case. But that's why you always end up with all these different arguments of who created God? Well, this is another set of existence. Or it wasn't God that created the universe. That doesn't count for the Big Bang. It's a multiverse. So there's still another something on that other side of that Big Bang. The idea of the Christian term creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing, actually isn't 100% correct, because you want to consider God nothing, and God is definitely a thing. So the idea of creation out of nothing always has the connotations of creation out of no material thing. So I wanted to bring that up with you, because it's going to be something that will be thrown into your face. Is that, you don't believe in creatio ex nihilo? Since something cannot pop into existence uncaused out of nothing, something always had to exist. So once again, you can't talk about the bridge between spiritual and material things. You can't have a bridge between a nothing and a thing. There's no even statistical probability that something can pop out of nothing. And we'll even get into the nuts and bolts on that later too. All of these arguments, mind you, drill down into, you can actually go to school, get a doctorate, write a dissertation on this kind of stuff, and still not even drill down as far as you want to go on a lot of these things. So this is a very powerful argument, and we were told you we're pulling from different sources. This was actually written by an Arabic, a Muslim, back, I think in the 14th century, and it's been worked on by a prominent Christian philosopher by the name of William Lane Craig, and I know you don't agree with this theology. Yes, sir.
Going back just a few sentences, so what you're stating is that philosophically or scientifically it would be almost impossible to prove that God has always existed?
No, it'd be impossible to prove that nothing can exist, no thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so God is a thing, but then when we get into his properties, the omniscience, omnipresence, he's also outside of time, he's immanent, he's eternal, so it means he is the infinite thing, not the universe.
Yes.
Always existing.
Is it proper to say that God is a thing?
Well,
You see, we're limited here.
yes.
We're limited in language because language was developed by humans.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, where in that realm do you put God?
Mm.
He's
So-
not physical, so
Yeah.
you can't put him as a thing.
Indeed. This
So
is,
there,
yeah, he's not a material thing. That's the one we want to get to.
what's a little bit better
Yeah.
definition, but still a thing.
Yes, exactly. He's a supernatural, a spiritual thing.
Okay.
And you can have, there's a bunch of lists of
Supernatural.
things, and that's why I told you about the big word ontology.
Uh-huh.
You can have things that are immaterial what about numbers? That's a thing, but it's not a material thing at all.
I remember that from
Yeah.
myself.
And then we can even have you say that humans created language. Well, I can push back that language is of the mind of God. We only have very low resolution interpretations of it. We have semantic content that's turned into linguistic content.
Precisely.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question, Rob. I want you throwing them at me.
I just thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, because otherwise, if you say that too much, you can get into certain levels of philosophy that's post-structuralism,
Yeah.
that basically says you can make up truth because all words, all language is just a structure of human thinking.
We
And all
had-
concepts come from these words.
My high school math teacher, my algebra teacher was an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question he asked the class when he walked in, he says, there's things you can prove and things you can't. He says, can you prove to me that you are here? Oh man, that got everybody in the room, you know how kids are always going everywhere, everybody paid attention to what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, of course, yeah, I can look, I'm here. He said, how are you gonna prove to me that you did that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, everybody saw me. Did everybody see him? Yeah. Now, how do you show me that you didn't dream? You're somewhere else, but you dreamed that this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that problem.
Oh yeah, it's day one in metaphysics class. So
Yeah.
if you want the counter argument run, this is only for your purposes, or anybody else wants it. The counter argument is what's called a Moorean fact. If y'all want to write that down, that's Moorean, Moorean fact, Moorean. And you're gonna love. It's such a simple argument, and you're gonna be like, oh, I never think of myself. But yeah, to be able to counter skepticism is what this guy was. It doesn't even have to be an atheist. You can be a Christian and a skeptic. I argue as a Christian skeptic a lot.
Yeah.
To be able to prove anything requires this phenomenology we're talking about, this first person perspective, and everything out in the world. It is true that we could be in the Matrix, we could be a brain in a vat, we could be in a dream. That's one of the hardest things to be able to prove, is that correspondence between, and this is what we're talking about, I had you looking that up, is what we have going on with our conscious perception and the external world. So, great question. So, I'm going to get back to the cosmological argument here. This is very simple and can be really fleshed out. So, it says, whatever begins to exist has a cause for its beginning. The universe began to exist. These are what we're talking about. These are called syllogisms. These are formal arguments in philosophy. So then this is your thesis, premise, conclusion. So thesis is whatever begins to exist has a cause for its beginning. Premise, the universe began to exist. This we can fairly well prove. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its beginning. And this is a very good argument, especially when you're trying to work this idea of, well, who created God. You have to go back into this idea of that, therefore the universe has a cause to beginning, and then we have to tie from that, we have to tie that cause to God.
Right, and then to that, they'll run back to the who created God, and they'll say God didn't begin to exist, he always existed because he's external.
Mm-hmm. And then if you try to say whoever this God creator was matches all the qualifications for God, well, that is God, and it just collapses back down. So they keep trying to kick the can back down the road, and the can keeps rolling back, right back to God. That's a good analogy. So yeah, thank you very much for that. And so this covers these are the main premises, broken down a little bit more. The universe either began to exist, or it has always existed. That's a necessity. That is your necessary versus contingent argument. So the universe is not necessary, it's contingent. It had a beginning. The beginning was either caused or uncaused, and something can't come out of existence out of nothing, and that's what we're arguing about beforehand. And the beginning was caused. It was either personal or not personal. Those are the two kind of choices you have in the idea of causation. It must be personal, since change cannot emerge from changelessness without a personal agent. And this is the big thing when we're talking about agent-state causation. This is where you're talking about with the mind, spiritual matter, whatever you want, an agent, and then a state, and that's going to be how things are in the world, rather than a state-state causation. So state-state causation talks about event causation, right? So a lot of modern atheists, materialists, will view the world as a big pool table of things bumping into each other. One billiard ball hits the next, hits the next, hits the next. But something has to be that initial moving billiard ball, and that billiard ball cannot move by itself. And this is where the state of the argumentation's at, and the high-up nerds that like to study this kind of stuff. But there has never been a documented case of anything that the original cause of anything has been anything other than an agent. So here on Earth, we don't ever see anything that's not other than the weather and everything like that. Everything we deal with on a daily basis has some sort of person causing everything. But once we get outside of our community, then you're talking about the world at large, universe, and everything like that. We've got a huge amount of time going back to an initial point, and that initial point, can anybody think of any possible way where something material could have been caused to move on itself, all by itself? And this is the question you want to pose to, we're going to use that word interlocutor again, or just our
With what now?
Can you think of anything that has ever happened that has been caused without an agent causation, without something, a person, a spiritual person if you want to say, but an agent just means something with a consciousness? Is there any instance of that? So,
Off the top of my head.
yeah, and that's something we can,
Even, because if you think of stuff like, even stuff floating in space, it has a trajectory, and the only one that changes those trajectories are other bodies. So everything is enforced by one thing or another. It's not pushing itself. It just got pushed one time, and then kept on going, and it's going through different magnetic forces of all the other objects.
whichever we
Until
you get to that initial point.
Until it hits something.
Yeah.
Then it stops.
Yeah, but so we have all these different collisions we want to say, but they're all going to go back to an initial collision.
Yes, you go back to the.
Yeah, and this has been known way back. Even Plato would argue the concept of a prime mover, that nothing moves on its own. There always had been something to create that initial movement.
Thomas, our book on page 9 and 10, it talks about Richard Dawkins, who even admits to Time magazine that there is something incredibly grand and incomprehensible and beyond our present understanding. When challenged with "That's God," he replied, "Yes, but it could be any of a billion gods. It could be the god of the Martians or of the inhabitants of Alpha Centauri. The chance of it being a particular god, Yahweh, the God of Jesus, is vanishingly small." So even Dawkins admits there's something out there.
Oh yeah. That's a huge thing. So if you ever, I've seen you've heard of Barna, it's like a Christian group that goes out and does a bunch of mass surveys and gets a lot of data. They did a survey of atheists and of Christians, and they said, atheists, what argument is the hardest one for you to counter that would most make you believe in God? And they all say fine-tuning the universe. And then for Christians, question's always going to be the problem of evil. But you'll always have this like manifest wonder of people that are looking up the vastness of space and the beauty of everything just works together, and they feel some nascent divine feeling in their heart. And that's something we can talk about later. As I said, Calvin brought up the idea of the sense of the divine that we're all imbued with, and people want to say in their heart, this is their heart, try to assign that to something else than God. And you'll see that it's like, usually you'll run into a lot of psychological barriers towards God. There are some honest skeptics out there, but those you run into few and far in between, and they will let you know, like, I agree with all your arguments, but logically I can't hold to this, and then they'll even hold to everything against what we believe in. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later, especially when we get into the moral argument tonight.
Where it says if the beginning was caused, it was either personal or not personal, like, because you run into those people who state, well, yeah, I believe that there's a God, basically an energy source,
Mm-hmm.
and it has, it can't have any properties or personal properties.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of like Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, so you get a lot of that, especially a lot of New Age thought. But the thing is, energy is a material thing. It's not something that exists outside the material world. Energy in modern theory is an excitation upon a field, and I better explain an excitation on a quantum field. And those quantum fields don't exist outside. They're contingent upon creation, upon the Big Bang. They didn't exist on the other side of the Big Bang, so you can't have even the energy on the other side of the Big Bang.
Yeah.
What? And then if you turn Einstein's E equals mc squared argument around, that's energy equals mass times the speed of light squared.
Mm-hmm.
Flip that around, and what that means is, in a very rough shod way, mass is congealed energy. We're made out of like frozen energy, for lack of a better term. That's a really, really stretched argument, or analogy. But even the energy in and of itself is a material item. Even though we think of it as something that we can't see, we do see the effects of it. And we're using electricity right now, and I'm using kinetic and like other thermodynamic energies, just in the way my voice is carrying up to you, vibrating the air, so you can even hear me. So it is something that is a manifestation of the physical world. So
Got it.
okay, all right. So we're going to get into. We talked about necessity and contingency, so we're going to talk about how that deals with the fine-tuning argument. One of my favorite arguments there is out there. Has anybody ever heard of the fine-tuning argument? I'd really like to see if any.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody want to risk a little definition?
No.
You wanna go?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Alright, this is kind of a shot in the dark.
Mhm.
Alright, the fine tuning argument would be, if this Earth, the space of the planets is just so the breathing, or like the air is just right for humans. The way just life here is just so right and precise for life, and not only for human life, but for life in general.
Period.
Then there must be something intelligent that created it.
Yeah, that's a very good definition, Rachel. Thank you very much for that. It actually even covers not even just life, even existence itself.
Existence, if you stop and consider, and I read this somewhere, if our Earth were to move just slightly, or slow down just slightly, it will have such a devastating effect on life as we know it.
Mhm.
For us, and we only think about the humans, but hey, what about all the vegetation and all the, right now you hear a lot about this green
Greenhouse gases,
greenhouse
climate change.
gases, that kind of thing. The mass effect because of the precise arrangement or the finite arrangement of everything. I just can't see anybody arguing that it was not or is not maintained by a intelligent being.
Exactly, and that's exactly, as I stated with earlier, was that is probably the most difficult question the atheists have to deal with. And to get a more fine resolution definition, you guys were definitely in the ballpark, is fine-tuning, the fine-tuning argument just states the conditions in the universe, actually at the beginning of the Big Bang and up till now, are so precise that any deviation would result in no life, no intelligent life, no life, and even up to the point that there's not even existence. Like, so if the gravitational constant was a minute degree higher or lower, either the universe would have expanded out so quickly, matter couldn't even have formed, or it would have collapsed on itself a long time ago. So that's one of the things, like we talk about the distance of the planet, like the Earth is in a Goldilocks zone, and that Goldilocks analogy is actually perfect for the fine-tuning argument. Our universe exists in a perfect Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. Our Earth is the exact distance away from the perfect star. It's not a variable star, it doesn't kick out a ton of radiation, so it's not destroying life on Earth. We got the planet Jupiter sopping up all the asteroids for us. We don't have a pulsar sitting right next to us. We're not in the center of the galaxy where we're getting bombarded by radiation. The strength of the weak and strong nuclear force are so finite that if they weren't the way they were, we couldn't even have atoms, so there would be no material in the universe. So the list of items is like 10 to the 64 power. That many different variables that if they weren't that precise, we would not have intelligent life as we know it. So, very difficult argument. The atheists do have a counter, actually they kind of two counters, but you're gonna find out they're just basically trying to turn the argument around, and they're not that easy to defend for the atheists. But, so we're talking about what the good thing about the fine-tuning argument, it does point out that the universe's orderliness is necessary. It couldn't be any other way. If one of these tiny conditions, and there's many, many conditions changed, we wouldn't be here. So we're talking about all these different laws that we're talking about. Chance doesn't actually have anything to do with it. A lot of what the multiverse theory, is an answer to fine-tuning, believe it or not. Their idea is that, well, we got an answer for your very fine-tuning. There can exist a near infinity of other universes where all the different constants in the universe, their universes were slightly different. We're just, one tiny constant. We just happen to be in the lucky one where the constants are perfect, all the constants of nature are perfect for life. And I think that y'all remember that word I used last week, bloated ontology, which is those big words again. Has anybody here heard of Occam's razor before? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
About what, I'm sorry?
Occam's razor. It typically goes like when you're faced with a number of different arguments for a single problem, the one that is most simple is usually the most true. It actually deals, the more precise meaning is if your explanation is basically a Rube Goldberg machine, if you all know what a Rube Goldberg machine is, then that's most likely not it. And you have to, I actually love that. If you ever get the chance to read William of Ockham, he was a Christian theologian and philosopher back in the 14th century. No, he's 12th century. Probably get that wrong. His work is amazing. Really good in translating a lot of the stuff we're talking about today. So this gives us the idea that if God exists, a highly ordered universe is highly probable. Once again, the other explanation would be a multiverse, and we just covered that. This proves to be more than an adequate alternative. An intelligent mind responsible for these laws And that's one of the big arguments, one of the more simple arguments you can actually state when you're talking to an atheist about certain things. Not just the laws of nature, we're talking moral laws, everything else. In order for there to be laws, there has to be a lawgiver. There has to be somebody making the laws. There's ways around that argument, which we'll get in the advanced class, but that is something very important to hold on to. So you'll hear, because I made this excuse when I was young too. It's like, so why is the universe so finely tuned? I would have stated, well, because science, or because the laws of the universe are that way. And then you just drill into, okay, if you have the laws, where do these laws come from?
Who created those laws?
Is that?
Who created those laws? But again, we're looking, and this has always bothered me from, like I said, studying science.
Mhm.
That we're sitting on or we're living in ever expanding universe.
Mhm.
And when they hit that theory of the Big Bang, which is during my period of time that I remember studying about that.
Christian came up with that theory, mind you.
Yeah, I know. And so if it's expanding, now that means this thing is so fine tuned that even if, as it is expanding, if you believe that theory, we're moving as a entity,
Mhm.
a universal entity that still keeps those same properties as expanding out. My answer to one of the teachers, I remember, I said, well,
Just-
according to the word of God, this world is gonna end.
Yeah.
I said, when we reach that distance,
Yeah.
that's when that's gonna
Yeah,
happen.
look up the, write this down, I want you to look up, this is gonna blow your mind when you read into this. Read into the cosmological horizon.
Cosmo, okay.
And this is all scientific, so it can get kind of thick and deep, but, and then tell me about it next week.
Cosmological what?
Horizon,
Horizon. Now that makes sense.
yes, the
I tell
question.
you this much, I can't throw a grenade in the forest and create a clock.
Depends.
Yeah,
How big-
yeah, so the old argument, yeah, that's a good
Depends on how
comeback.
big your grenade is.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? How big is the grenade?
Well, this is one of the things I want to, like, you saw how that atheist debated, he's like, oh, all the angels dancing on the head of the pin. You can use these kind of statements if you know the guy you're talking to and you already have this good relationship built, like you're already able to joke around, kind of like me and you do, right?
Yeah.
But if you use something like that on your first engagement, it's gonna turn people away, and that's one of the things I did not bring up about that debate, okay, so that debate is not the apologetics you'll run into. You're gonna
That's
be,
a debate.
exactly, and the debate, you're playing for your team, you're like, it's a, what do you call it, one of those rap showdowns, you know, mic drop, I made my point,
Yeah.
but you're not really, you'll be able to present your argument, but most of the time, if you're gonna be confrontational like that, it's a lot of times gonna turn away
Yeah.
people who you wanna talk to. But what those debates are good for is training your side. So, these are good training materials for us, but we don't wanna use the arguments.
Out there.
Yeah, let the other side do the arguments, let them end up taking that low moral ground and drudge around in the sludge, but we don't wanna do this as Christians. Except we can joke around about it, of course, but yeah.
Mud is a
People
marine's best
have
friend.
to use like sugar-coated versions of the
No.
arguments.
You don't have to sugarcoat it either. I'm not talking about third wayism either here. It's not that 13th commandment, be nice. You can be firm, but we want to be rational, and we want to be show a certain level of Christian love as we're doing it. Love, remember we talked about last week, can be either positive or negative. It could be corrective, it could be disciplinary, but we definitely don't want to be.
Confrontational.
Yeah, but we don't want to take the low moral ground either.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, you don't even, God, the universe ordered this.
Mm-hmm.
And like Farrell said, when God spoke things into being,
Mm-hmm.
that he had to speak this into being in order for this to be spoken into being. And then this, so there was this orderliness that this had to exist before this could exist, and then this. So, you know, that's even to me an argument to ask, well, if you just read this, what do you see in here of order? What do you see in here of you want to talk about science? Okay, then identify the scientific concepts here
In the Bible?
in the Bible.
Okay.
You know, just what do you see in the beginning, the separation of the light? And then you just begin to say, okay, you wanna talk about science? Let's look at science in chapter 1. What are your science concepts you see here?
Yeah, that's exactly what you want to push back against is you're probably, well, I'm going to preface this, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble using Genesis 1, even Genesis 2 as a way to confirm.
But you know, you can almost do it a whimsical way.
Yeah.
Let's just play the game here and you try and pin some science concepts into this.
Well, this is one of the things I do want to stress. Using science to interpret the Bible can run into danger. This is one of the things I'm going to say. It's, that has a lot to do with why I have a view on creationism. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but the Bible was not written for a time of scientific knowledgeable people. It's not it doesn't speak scientific truths, but it doesn't speak to people in the modern era and our modern scientific conceptions of the world. So the reason why I say that isn't anything me promoting what I believe. You'll have that argument used against you.
But science explains.
Science explains theory. That's all science does. Science explains how things appear in the universe. And that's what we're going to get into. Because if we're leaning too much into science debate, you're going to run into somebody who really knows the philosophy of science. And that's going to be able to tear you apart. But what you want to do is instead get into the argument is, what other worldview do you know that has a concept, a cosmological explanation of the universe being created at a single point in time, and then from there, delivering us creation as we know. But if you get into the minutia, and I can tell you this, I've debated against atheists using Genesis 1, and they're gonna come back at you in a certain way. So what I wanna say is we're talking about presuppositions here. Our job is to undermine their presuppositions to where they can say, you know what, I was wrong about that. I really think I was taking science too literally. Because they accuse us of literalism too, right? They can be as equally as literal of scientism.
Yeah.
So at that point, then you can start building your case. So we have to do like kind of a breaking down of all that brick structure they have that composes their worldview, and then we're
Start building it back.
Exactly.
Well, I think one thing that's important to know is that just because, say they can, because whenever you argue with, or you debating like an atheist who is purely on science, they have to understand that their position on science does not, does not prove a non-existence of God. You know, and so, and once you can once they understand that, I mean, for instance, an atheist can believe in a Big Bang. All right, let's move on. I'm fine with that. Believe in a Big Bang. That doesn't prove the non-existence of God.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, they need to understand that, because here's the truth, is they don't have an argument. They don't have an argument, I mean, philosophically, people don't have an argument. To try to
rephrase it, they don't have a good argument. They may have an argument, maybe.
Yeah, they may have an argument, but their argument is not good. I'm sorry, yeah.
Yes, Larry, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna throw a thought in there from science. If you go back just a little ways back in science, if you take wheat, put water on it, you get rats, spontaneous generation. That was scientific theory for the longest time.
Oh, yeah.
Until Louis Pasteur came along and said, okay, here's chicken broth that I've made, it's been boiled, it's covered, it doesn't go bad.
Yeah.
As soon as it's open, it goes bad. Well, it's gotta have more airflow, and then you get into all the tenets of what he did.
You know, miasma theory, yes, like
Yeah.
the diseases were created out of bad smells. That's something thank you for bringing up. I was gonna bring that up against that Hovind debate, was the atheist had brought up the concept of the angels, dancing on the head of a pin. You don't want to defend his straw man. Instead, you can actually go in and present the science too has its, let's say, its failings, its old things that held true. My favorite one is called phlogiston theory. This was something that was held to up until like the early 20th century, was that fire was something that was, what we know as fire, was viewed as a substance within all material things. And then when something burned, this phlogiston floated away. And then that was eventually, and this was held onto by like the biggest of brains, Isaac Newton would have held to the phlogiston theory back in the day, so science can be disproved.
Because fire is a wonderful thing to mess with people's minds on.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're saying there are things that you say are spiritual that exist, but we can't touch, taste, feel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You believe in fire? Of course, everyone's gonna say yes. Okay. But shine a flashlight on fire, does it have a shadow? And the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never get a shadow out of fire. So, okay, explain that.
It doesn't exist.
Right.
I mean, it does.
Fire exists, light exists, but it's not gonna create a
Kind of
shadow.
like a glass age.
Yeah, they're photons, but yeah, have you ever seen a
Yeah.
photon? That's what you want to, you
And
can
that's
do.
basically,
What is gravity? Okay, they're gonna say it's a warping of the space-time, Okay, exactly how that manifests itself. Well, we don't know. We don't really have a strong theory, especially we can't tie in. We talk about this theory of everything. They're trying to come up with how to tie in how gravity works on a quantum level, how it works on a cosmological level. It doesn't work. Okay, so you've got yourself a little explanatory gap. You don't know how to explain anything. So you're gonna say something like, I'm gonna appeal to like a God of the gaps argument. Well, you have the same thing going on here. You're just gonna think, you're thinking I'm appealing to some supernatural force, but you're appealing to some rational idea, but you're actually still doing the same thing I'm doing. You're appealing to mystery, but you're saying science, my faith in science says it'll one day explain it.
Oh, my favorite is with evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Show me something evolving.
Short-necked giraffes all died off because the long-necked giraffes ate everything. Right.
Alright, we're getting down on the rabbit trail, off of fine tuning, but we're gonna go into bringing it back in. So, wait, it's all right. These are great questions, but we don't want to have to be here till like 10 o'clock tonight. I don't want to do that to y'all. So we're back here to fine tuning about the multiverse. So this is just a kicking the can down the road. We have no evidence for them. So anything, remember I told you in last class, anything that you say was before the Big Bang, and even honest atheists will admit to this, is metaphysical. And metaphysical is just a fancy scientific, philosophical way of saying
Supernatural.
exactly. So if anybody wants to claim a multiverse, say, well, I didn't know you were religious too. You're holding to things. You're holding faith into things unseen. If you want to be a little pithy, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you have that relationship, yeah. If you have that relationship, well, once again, so like kicking the can down the road. So what created the multiverse? Well, another multiverse, because then you would have to have some form of causation, an agent causation, a first cause. So unless you don't want to, you want to hold it, there's still just randomness. So that multiverse has to be a result of a multiverse, which has to be a result of another multiverse ad infinitum. And we're not going to deal with that anyway. But anything that's got the power to create a multiverse sounds a lot like God. Okay, so there are responses the atheists will bring to fine-tuning. Common responses: we shouldn't be surprised that the universe is fine-tuning for intelligent life because we wouldn't even exist in order to experience surprise. And this gets communicated in two different ways. Has anybody here ever heard of the anthropic principle?
It's been long.
You got two forms of a weak and strong anthropic principle. The only principle, it just basically says, well, the universe wouldn't be fine-tuned if we weren't here. Well, we're just going to say after the fact, oh yeah, duh, we're here, so yeah, no doubt it is. So we're just going to accept it as it is and move on. And kind of what it boils down to. It's a really slight mischaracterization, but I would say it's not too far off the mark. Weak anthropic principle only states that the laws, actually both of them are strong, but anthropic principle states that the laws of the universe are as the way they are. They're so fine-tuned only because we're already here to observe them. That's it. So they're basically pointing away from God and pointing to man. So I'm trying to move on. So we are in the moral argument. This is the part I really wanted to get to. So two versions of it that are kind of flipped, moving their premises to, well, their thesis to the conclusion, and vice versa. So, we're going to be talking about is how, once again, the whole subject of this class is divine hiddenness, right? How can we know God? How do we know that God exists? And the moral argument to me is a very, very powerful one that we use generally. So it states, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties likely do not exist. The premise is objective moral values and duties do exist, so therefore God likely exists. And the likely is because there are arguments against these. I don't want you to, that we'll address in the advanced classes. And then here's the argument flipped on its head. If objective moral values exist, then God probably exists. Objective moral values exist, and therefore God probably exists. This is the concept that we're wanting to talk to an atheist, and they want to appeal to some sort of moral tenet, moral law, human rights, you name it. And where do these rights come from? Where do these moral laws come from? An honest atheist will have to say, well, there is no morality. Especially if you're going to go with kind of an evolutionary path. The only morality is passing your genes on to the next generation. So what are the specific features of human experience? Moral agency. Human moral agency, including libertarian human freedom, except for, you really hardcore neo-Calvinists, and consciousness. And moral virtues, which suggest an ideal toward which humans are to aim. Teleology, we're going to get into that later. A naturalistic account excludes teleology and cannot adjudicate between conflicting desires, e.g. the desire to fulfill one's moral duty and the desire to eat or drink. And this is originally proposed by C.S. Lewis a long time ago. I would recommend you all read C.S. Lewis. If you don't agree with his theology, he is a Christian philosopher and apologist. Like way up there. So, and plus he's a very good, easy read. And I know you read Screwtape Letters. It was a very good.
Half of
Yeah, I was so tired last week I couldn't even remember what.
Yeah.
Anyway, the teleology is basically the study that things have a purpose, things have an ultimate goal. Like the ultimate goal of humanity is to glorify God, that we have even an end times to deal with. That's a teleological premise, and there'll be that God has a covenantal promise that we're moving towards. That's teleological. In order to get rid of the concept of God, atheists and naturalists have basically dispensed with the concept of teleology. If you mention anything of like things have an ultimate purpose, that's heresy out in the atheist world. Because that points to an agent. You can't have a goal without the goal being set. A moral gap exists between my own moral achievement and the ideal from which I have fallen short. This moral gap suggests the need for divine assistance or grace to bridge that gap. What this argument here is important for is the concept that all humans have, that we fall short. And we fall short of some sort of moral precept. We fall short of some idea that we did not do what is good. Unless you're a complete sociopath or psychopath where you don't have this concept ingrained in you, which even they do have a certain kind of moral sensibility. All humans have a sense of we ought to do good. In moral duties, this requires that more than natural law, and natural laws determined by human reasoning, and I'll get into that later, but a divine command theory, laws are God's commands. We're talking about speaking into existence. God also spoke into all moral laws. But natural laws, an argument you'll get from atheists, not all of them. In fact, it's fallen out of a lot of favor lately, but that all these laws existed out there somewhere, just like the laws of science, and we discovered these moral laws, and we're progressing towards this idea of moral laws, but those moral laws just happen to be there. Don't ask too many questions. Okay. So we all have a conscience. We all have that pricking feeling. We have this idea that we've done something bad. And we also have this idea of human value, human dignity being, as us Christians, human value is rooted in infinite personal being, but how can we speak of human rights? We hear that all the time in the news. This is violating their human rights. Where do these rights come from? Are they something, if they are of a culture, if they are of political forces, then there's no such thing as a good or bad human right. There is just the rights. You could state that Nazi Germany was equally as good and morally in their right as is the modern day US or was Israel or anything, because these laws or these rights were built up by cultural consensus, and they were used, not to get too much into ethics, but they were used by whatever ethical system they were using at the time. And we Christians, we use a virtue ethic. Everything comes in virtue of God's ultimate goodness. So this is an interesting thing when you start talking about values. Values, the study of normativity, you'll get that from your let's say the people who study modern studies, gender studies, racial studies, they're all going to be talking about normativity, and you'll be able to push back on where these norms come from, and they're going to always try to say they're a cultural construct. That if they're a cultural construct, they're only right in as much as the culture says. That's what I'm trying to say is, from our last or first class, a lot of these arguments are geared towards atheism, right? Unfortunately, the world's moved past atheism. We're now in this post-truth world, post-modernism. So we're going to gear up towards that later. But right now we're getting our basic toolkit in here. So a lot of these arguments are only going to be working with, you're running into a hardcore atheist, somebody who's going to be into science, but not anybody who's going to be like, this is my truth, or those pithy statements like, don't judge me, I'll do you do you, I'll do me. These kind of subjective concepts of morality. In fact, I just tied right into that, not even looking at the slide. So, as Christians, we hold to the idea of moral laws being objective. They're not tied to our subjective feelings. Anything where you're going to use the term objective means they are opposite of us. Subjective is us. We're the subjects. In Christianity, God's the object. And you're going to run into this in a grammatical function too in arguments, is the objective is the subject of the discussion. The object, excuse me. It's that which is being manipulated, and the subject is the person doing the action. But within Christians, it's flipped, where God ends up becoming the object. God is the object, but it's also independent of the subject. We are the subject. And the object is something that's being moved around. Don't want to get too much into the grammar, but this is going to be important when we're getting into a lot of the postmodernism later. But all of our moral laws are not dependent upon people. They are out there, whether you want to hold to a natural law theory, which you hear about the concept that, this is something I want to tie in what you said earlier, that the concept that this nation was created by Christians. Well, it's true in a little degree. A lot of the Christians that created, or that signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were what we call deists these days. It would have been called like a universalist. There are most different ways that you can say who they were. They believed in a clockmaker God. A God that created the universe and stepped back and has a good. It's important when you say spoke into existence. I like to use the word speaking. That means God is not this deist conception of a God. Yeah. And what?
Still going on.
Maintaining, yes, and able to interact through miracles, through the through the incarnation of His Son, Jesus Christ, second person of the Trinity. So yeah, so God is still involved. So this is one of the things I want to talk about when it comes to objective and subjective. Okay, so the good and the right, value and duty. We have there's a distinction between the good and right. And good is what we're talking about when we were talking about numbers earlier. You don't have to believe this as a Christian, but I generally follow the idea of beauty, rationality is a bigger category than moral obligations, duties, permissions. But even though those things exist outside of ourselves, in fact, they don't even exist in creation in and of itself. I believe they exist in the mind of God. And the concepts of, you've heard of the transcendental qualities. I don't know if anybody's heard of these from ancient philosophy. That's the true, the good, and the beautiful. And God is the source of all of those. So he's also the source of moral laws. I don't know why I'm getting down the path of that, but there's a little rabbit trail. I'm sorry if I'm getting us off. Exactly, I'm guilty too.
No, I was gonna say,
I gotta
just to
write
go along with the rabbit hole.
Oh, you want to learn about Christian Platonism then?
No, well, I don't know if that's what this is called, but, you know, also, because if, you're going by involving the good, beautiful, and what is it? Truth. God is also responsible for, you know, death, calamity, and wrath. I mean, so,
Yeah, they'll be considered concepts. And that still falls under the category.
yeah, that would still fall under this category, yes. But I'm just stating that it only tells, you know, where they would look at that and be like, well, only God can do good. But, as where we would say, yeah, God is only does, quote unquote good, because even whenever he judges, dispenses his wrath, or causes calamity, it's still all for his glory.
Oh, good. There's a point. Yeah, these ideas are God manifesting his qualities. Where do these qualities exist? They exist in God himself, but where in God? You consider that God is an immaterial mind. Does he have a body? It's described in the Bible that he has body parts, of course, but that's going to be something interesting. But yeah, you're going to like this. Where you're walking down is, I know you don't like William Lane Craig. He doesn't hold
No, it's
any
not
of
that I don't like
I know, but he doesn't hold any of that. So you're still in your comfort zone here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he's what's called a nominalist. He doesn't believe any of these are existent. They're all part of creation, or just general ways of explaining things. But all right, so the value, the good, that's which is desirable and of itself. This includes duties, beauty, etc. So we have our concept of morality emanating out of God being perfect good, and this is this idea of the virtues I was talking about. We know our moral objective truths in that they exist from and they manifest outside of God. That's how they become completely objective at that point in time. Just tie it all back together. Oh. And this is tying what you're talking about, the other characteristics. God's good character, personhood, is the source of moral truths. They are anchored in God, who exists in all possible worlds, and that's a good way of arguing is multiverse, and saying that there could be a idea of like an area where God doesn't have access to. God has access to all possible worlds, and possible worlds even subsume the idea of multiverses, which is something we'll get into later. Subsume, not subsume. Yeah, no, but subsume. Yeah. And actually, somebody raise their hand or like do this, like Thomas, you're getting into the weeds here. Bring it back in. So, all right. So first one.
How many pages you're going to be writing?
Oh yeah. How many am I gonna write? Oh, I've already written them. Yeah.
Probably longer than 6 pages too.
I got a 10-page due Friday. Yeesh. I don't remember that right now. It get me stressed out. So, personal good gods and necessary existence would better ground these necessary moral facts as they are rooted in the divine nature, which is the ground of human personhood and dignity. And this is something, remember I told you where we have scripture, I really extol you to go look up. This is the idea of where all these concepts are. I am rooting these all biblically. And unfortunately, I don't have Farrell's broad memorization of scripture, so I can't remember these off the top of my head.
Where are you going from?
Oh, what? I'm just saying that if you don't want to, I try to advise y'all to look these up, and I can't quote this off the top of my head, is all I'm trying to say. So goes back to what we're talking about is our moral good is all rooted in God as being the root of, the ground of human personhood and dignity. Even our worth comes from God, and the idea of our rights. You talk about the concept of lives being worth saved, lives being, these human rights all tie into some sort of concept of human flourishing, humans living a best possible life. Well, where does this idea that humans have the dignity to even be valued as such? And that only comes if our value comes from God. Especially as Christians, our value comes from that we are image bearers of God. We were created for his glory. So goodness without God, knowing versus being. An atheist will say, I can know moral objective truths even if I don't believe in God. Or atheists can act morally as believers, but the more fundamental issue is being. How did beings of value emerge from valuelessness? So like we're talking about something coming out of nothing. How do you get value out of no value, out of no thing?
We only have value because God valued us.
Exactly. God is the create, is that source of value, yes. But it's just like the idea of where can you get matter from nothing, where you can get energy out of nothing, where nothing can come from nothing. Tying even back to the idea of our values, our dignity, our worth, all come from God.
If you buy into evolution, value has to just come from the survival of the fittest.
Exactly. There are arguments out there for evolutionary morality that are quite sophisticated and are if you're not schooled in how to confront them, they're a little difficult to defeat, but they ultimately boil down to evolution is only geared towards one thing, and that's the survival of the species, but you can also go evolution can be geared towards the survival of a community if you're talking about a social animal like us. So all of our morals come from an evolutionary process of us being community creatures. We all live in nations and tribes.
I think a good argument for that would probably be if I'm arguing against a Christian, I'd probably be like, well, I mean, there was for dogs per se, there's evolutionary value in partner or companionship. In order to thrive, you would form bonds.
Yeah.
So
There definitely is, and that's more towards the sociological aspect of that. Yeah, but then you're talking about you've got some sort of a sociology within the creatures. Whether they could be like
well, not just creatures. I'm talking like even with people.
Yeah.
You would form bonds with people and then grow to love them.
Yeah.
And then therefore, out of an evolutionary concept of survival of the fittest, you could derive love.
Yeah. You can.
But the value would come into place.
Exactly.
If that no longer served you.
The value would only be towards propagating of the species in the sociological concept, so it would be the propagation of your species.
Well, the value would eventually be in love.
But if it didn't serve you any longer, and you're just survival of the fittest, then
but this love
that
would
love could be thrown away.
Yeah, go for it.
Then I would state, which I completely disagree with this, I'm just stating. I would state that the value of acceptance, the social aspects of evolution would be where you found the value. So therefore, someone would not grow, someone wouldn't grow dispensable because of the value you got from evolution and by loving them. So therefore, because you love somebody, just because you're around long enough, you started to like them, you depended on them, they depended on you. And because of that, species grew, civilizations became about, things of that nature. So, but which I think that's the hard part. You're explaining why it's difficult to state, well, no, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because they could argue that you don't need a God in order to grow civilization.
Yeah.
And to have certain morality like love, tenderness, gentleness, kindness.
Yeah, especially because we're communitarian animals, but then if you want to go down that trail, that could be broken down within the social constructivist argument, meaning that morals are socially constructed, but even on an evolutionary methodology. I don't know, I'm trying to think of a simple word for that. An evolutionary way. That's lots of words to think of it, but what you're going to run into is that ultimately, as long as it promotes the survival of the species, this love you're talking about, love could be manifested in taking care of a dying grandmother, somebody who doesn't have enough money to buy food, so you buy for them, or as long as it promotes the survival of the species, if it means calling the herd and we have to start doing human sacrifices a la the Aztecs,
Over the cliff.
Yeah,
that's, yeah, exactly, laying our babies out.
but even they could they could argue that that is, now that's subjective moral.
Yeah, but then you're redefining love to being something that which promotes the survival of the community of the species. And it can be even your community, or is it global community objectively, or is it just your tribe, your nation, or but you want to talk about the species, what, in general, what promotes the thriving of the species on Earth, and we're gonna have to get into ethics for that. That's always gonna be something, the world follows basically an ethical principle called utilitarianism, or the sub-branch called
Are
consequentialism.
you gonna get into that too? On this?
In the more advanced, yes.
Oh, okay, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
so these basically like ends justify the means kind of, moral systems.
No, I can see why that would be a very difficult argument
Yeah,
to argue.
yeah, it is, yeah, especially because the whole world basically does not operate on the moral system Christians do. In fact, a lot of Christians, we presume the world's moral system, and we operate that way. In fact, a lot of bad theology comes from that we view God as a means towards an end. You kind of get in the concept of where this is going, and you'll hear a lot of God, what God did for me, or because of God, I'm this way, but it's not by virtue of God's sacrificing his son on the cross. No.
No, I mean, just recently you could hear a lot about that, with like the testimonies at the Asbury revival.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to get it.
No, I know, yeah. It's
But
fine,
that's
yeah.
what that reminds me of, so.
Yeah, and that's where, these are the different, remember the tools of discernment, like the work, what I told you, is like the world will hold us that we're being judgmental, but tools of discernment are ways of being able to classify things, be able to say, okay, I understand that due to its properties, or I understand that due to the way it's acting, or I understand, okay, what they're talking about, this fits into this conception. So that's what our discernment is, like, not like, you're a sinner, even though kind of say that's discernment, it's like, you're a sinner because, and then the because becomes the discernment. We see you not exhibiting, like, say, the fruits of the Spirit, you're doing things that go against God's moral law, things of that nature. Yeah. Which, I want to talk to you about legalism. I can't wait to have this talk one of these days. I know we got a lot of talk about that, but yeah.
I like legalism.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking like a little bit of it. I like it.
We'll talk about it, like the concept of like the divine command theory and virtue, and God's virtues.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah, that's where.
yeah, we could
that's
I
where it
could
gets
get into
fun.
that right now, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know you can, and
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your restraint, buddy, but
Yeah.
we gotta get together again, I got some more work to be done in the house, and
Yeah,
I got a
sounds
fence
good.
that needs to be built.
Yeah,
so-
come on over, let's
Yeah.
get the fence.
Yeah, let's do that. Alright, so,
Sorry.
yeah, we nerded up when we were away from class, and that's probably the reason why we got off
I
a
can
lot of rabbit
tell.
trails, yeah. No, yeah, but I thank God for my brother, I thank all of y'all sharpened me. I do mean that, because it's not when I'm not coming in here wanting to give you my second best, and last week, that's why I was so apologetic, I felt like I gave you my second best, but I'm here, I'm rested, I'm studied up, we're pumped, so let's keep on going, we have still about a good 8 slides to go. So, incompleteness of secular ethics. People promoting secular, objective, ethical systems may know and affirm many truths theists affirm, moral obligations, virtue, or character, but they're still incomplete because they cannot offer a basis for human dignity or duties without God. Knowing versus being, this dignity is rooted in the person of God. And this is what I'm saying, I love y'all. We're getting to the next slide even before I get to the next slide, so you guys are sharp. So you guys have any question on any of this? Nobody? All right, moving on. All right, so and this is what I'm talking about, to be a morally committed atheist is tough. Read that book. Many atheists themselves recognize that without God, objective goodness or moral value can't exist. So atheist philosopher J.L. Mackie states moral properties constitute so odd a cluster of properties and relations that they are most unlikely to have arisen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. This is an atheist saying, hey, we can't have these moral laws without a God. So, heard other statements of, I don't know if I get that as the next slide. I'll check. Nope, I don't. There are atheists out there that realize the fact that they can't have objective moral values. They can't have any moral values that aren't anything other than moral constructs, so they just I have to be true and honest. I can't live morally, so I won't.
Anyone know where the word sadism came from?
Marquis de Sade?
Not theologian, philosopher who was atheist and came to the conclusion that there was no basis for morals, so he became a very criminal person.
Yeah, I mean, most depraved person you can ever understand. Our concept of sadism is, like masochism, sadism is built on this gentleman's name because of the depraved sexual ethics he had. And his whole concept was just the concept of fulfilling my desires. And unfortunately, that tends to be the basis of most modern moral practices.
So as an atheist, you have to, if you got into this part of the argument, you'd have to prove that basically morals don't exist. That
They wouldn't prove it. They're just gonna if you're an honest atheist, you'll say, I got no ground here. I got no argument. You're right. I can't hold a moral theory or any objective moral theory. And there are some that do exist, that do admit just that, and then they still try to rebuild their lives under some sort of concept of morality. But they do realize that it cannot be an objective, and that's a key thing, an objective morality.
no, it has to be subjective because they would have to go with social construct.
And they can go with that, and they can go with how they feel, they can go with different pre-existing moral theories that there are out there. There's a ton of moral theories. If you want to get into the realm of ethics, it's a huge study. There's tons of different camps you could take, so. But yeah, you can't hold to an objective say something like the universal dignity of humans, to where we can say we have human rights. You can't say that.
No, you can't say what Hitler did was wrong.
Exactly.
You know, you'd have to say that Hitler was just going along with his own subjective moral reasoning.
Or within the reasoning of the survival of the German race, which was his main reasoning, the idea of expanding out the Lebensraum, the idea of conquering other countries to expand for the benefit and flourishing of the German race, even if it meant the expense of everybody else.
So would this be something not to focus very much on?
What?
Would this be something for us not to focus very much on?
In your debates, no, this is prime apologetic arguments here. Yeah, the argument like saying you can't say Hitler did bad, yeah, you stay on that.
Well, I think, there's a lot of atheists that are very moral.
Mhm.
I mean, they're altruistic,
Mhm.
they are very charitable,
Exactly.
they are very good people, but they're atheists.
Mhm.
And, I think one of the arguments they can have, they can look at we as Christians, and they can point out many
Oh, yeah.
things about
Oh,
us
yeah.
that are far from moral.
Oh yeah.
So that really challenges us to
Exactly.
clean our act up, and you talk about sanctification. That really should prod us to get into the Word
Yeah.
and really see what Christ demands
Exactly.
of us as a Christian.
I'm sorry.
Is it going to be related to the topic?
Yeah.
Go for it. Go for it.
Then I would have to say that it would be on the atheist to prove that all Christians are good.
They would, and what they do, and this is something even I did as an atheist. Are you acting the way Jesus stated in the Bible?
Mm-hmm.
No, but it would be impossible.
Well, I know, but it's a very easy argument. One of the best arguments you can ever pose to the atheist is the only true Christian, and they'll even throw this at you and say, yeah, you're right, it's the only true Christian was Christ. He was the only person who ever fulfilled the moral law perfectly. And that's where we push back on our virtue theory. We live in virtue of Him. We'll never be that good, but we live in virtue. We can only ever get to a certain degree of closeness. Some will only ever get to here, some will get here, in this idea of sanctification that Beverly brought up. But yeah, we admit that. And I know there's a bunch of other concepts we can talk about, Christians who fall short of Christ's commandment. But I can even quote Gandhi here, and I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but I would believe that Christianity were true if it weren't for the way that all Christians act. Or yeah, I think he said the way if it weren't for all you Christians, because we did not live up to our own standards. And that standard being Christ. But that's already built into the theology. No, we're never going to live up to the standard of Christ. None of us will be that perfect. but we live our lives in accordance to that. That's the pushback.
The two natures that we possess, and
Mhm.
the putting on and the
Yeah.
mortification, the dying too.
Exactly.
So that's,
Yeah,
you know,
and
Well,
our
that-
sanctification.
That would feed into our belief that none are good.
Yeah.
Only Christ is, or only God is
yeah,
good.
but that's gonna be an internal theological concept. Like you would say, like after you've done your apologetic method with the person you're talking to, and let's say they've confessed Christ, and then you're actually gonna be starting to teach doctrine. Then that's where that one's gonna be really hard to push. Maybe you could tie it into using some presuppositional apologetics, using the concept of evolutionary morality, but that's something we're going to talk about on a later basis. But I do want to bring up something Beverly said. So this gentleman from the debate we watched earlier kind of acted kind of nasty. Even I would even say that Ken Hovind was kind of yeah. There's a better word than I can think of. But when you're actually having these conversations, in fact, I can introduce you to atheist philosophers and scientists that are going to be some very charitable, very kind, very giving people. You wouldn't even, that debate doesn't even exist. And they'll talk and I just can't believe what you're saying. But it's not that I haven't covered it, but then you still want to be able to, you still perform your apologetics against them. The time you're going to run into the snappy atheists, yeah, you're going to run into them. I used to be that guy. I was the snarky kid that came over for Thanksgiving and somebody would say, oh, prayers, let's all pray together, and I'd make some snarky response. But then, once again, we want to try to do that more high ground, and that's a hard thing to do. It really is. Be patient, be kind. Yeah. What I like is the concept of a road to Emmaus kind of apologetics, where we basically walk and do life together with them. These guys there's a good conception of our apologetics. These guys had no clue that they were walking with Christ until after they sat down and had a meal with him. But he was able to go through every single theological step of all the prophecies culminating in him. So we can do that as our apologetics, all of our different apologetic premises, building up to that point. So yeah, that's I'm glad you brought that up. So I really thank you, Beverly. So where are we at? The is-ought problem. Okay, so use that big N word, the normativity. Anytime somebody crosses the line, is-ought line, say, this is this, or this ought to be that way, you're talking about normativity, so you're talking about values. This is something important to listen to when you're talking to people, because they've immediately crossed the topic from the conception of God, or like these kind of, just these ideas, into the concept of morality, how things should be. I think I explained that too much, but how do we move from the way things are to the way things ought to be? From the scientific to the moral, from the descriptive to the prescriptive. That descriptive is the term meaning like you're describing or prescriptive, how things ought to be. So given naturalism, that's a better word for atheism, without having to say, there's no difference between whether I ought to be moral or whether I ought to be hungry, since both are functions of evolutionary hardwiring to enhance survival and reproduction. These states just are. So this is a nice little condensed boiling down of what we were talking about, all these different ways of evolution leading to some sort of a moral foundation, because they're not talking science anymore, they're talking morality. So, and theism is basically in apologetics, and even when you get into theology, theism basically talks about any of the Abrahamic faiths. So that for our purposes, it's Christianity. So we can it also even means pre-incarnation Christ. So we're talking about, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were all theists. So we can use that conception too. So if it sounds kind of odd, I understand, but it gets us away from that deism that we talked about earlier. So theism avoids the is-ought jump because we have value from the very offset. My tongue is not working anymore. God, a supremely valuable being, makes valuable human persons in his image. They have an intrinsic dignity derived from the Creator. This avoids any leap from is to ought. Value and oughtness are built into us from the beginning. So we can't just say that there can be any other way, that we are moral beings. Okay, and the connection between personhood and value. Without God, a personal being, no persons and thus no moral values would exist at all. No persons, no moral value. So do rocks have moral values?
No.
It's a very simple conception there, you know? Okay, so then the kind of concepts that we could talk about the idea of the image of God when we're talking to atheists about the concepts of morality, especially as who we are as being moral agents, and that morality being from God. So we can talk about our spirituality, our capacity to relate to God, our emotion, our ability to feel deeply, rationality, our capacity to think deeply, creativity, our ability to engage in art, literature, and other expressions of imagination, volition, our capacity to make responsible choices that are up to us and that make a difference, and morality, our ability to carry out our moral duties and to make moral judgment. So we listened to Ken Hovind earlier. So if this, all that we are, is solely from evolutionary forces, we don't have an account for any of this, really, other than them just being an expression of evolutionary forces. How do one of my most powerful, favorite arguments are talking about arguments out of art and literature and beauty. How can we even have a concept of what is beauty? This idea we can look up into the sky and feel some sense of awe and wonder, that we can look at a grand painting in a museum and feel a sense of smallness and a sense of that we're just a smaller part of a greater beauty, or you hear a symphony and you almost feel like you feel the hand of God touching you, especially when you listen to Handel's Messiah, I'd say. Gets you really good in that direction. Or a lot of our wonderful praise team on Sunday mornings, don't want to discredit them. So, God as the guarantor of final justice and happiness. God guarantees that moral life and happiness coincide. Naturalism can't guarantee this. Objective moral values and duties exist. I'm talking about, there are honest people who say if no God, then none of this, but that's very few. You're going to run into that like 1 in every 5 million or something, 5 million. No, 5 million. But we all agree that objective moral values exist. And the key is when the person you're talking to appeals to human rights, objective moral values do exist and are inescapable, and our basic moral intuitions. The idea that there is a concept of a good, our consciousness pricking us that we did not hold up to what is good. All right, and where are we at? God is the guarantor of final justice and happiness. If we affirm rights, we must reject relativism. So no more of, that's right, that's true for you, but not for me. That's what relativism is, and that's what the world operates off of right now. Moral principles are discovered and not invented. There's that Christian Platonism there. So it's the idea that we are not constructing morals as a culture. They're not constructed in any way. They are from God, and we discover them. Even those who appeal to finding these natural laws, that points to God. So anytime you hear somebody say, hey, human rights, you've opened up an apologetic conversation here. And I see, does anybody have any questions on this? I got the looks of questions being heard.
Man, so, how do Christians affirm rights?
That they are from God. And they affirm because they demonstrate the value of humans as being image bearers of God. So our rights all come from that, or you can hold to like a strict divine command theory view, it's because God says so, to really boil it down.
God
But,
says so.
yeah.
Where does God say we have rights?
What?
Where does God say we have rights? Are you saying like
Yeah,
the right to live,
yeah,
or
not-
like?
Just in general, the biggest that we have rights are going to be our,
Like the right to exist?
I would say in the Decalogue and the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, because you've got the right to not be killed, not be murdered.
Yeah, so rights are the opposite of a responsibility and a duty.
No, I'm on board with divine rights, and the reason I was saying like a question, I believe in divine rights, for instance, the inherent value of life, like we have a right to live, we have a right to exist. Beyond that, I'm not sure what rights.
Are you getting to because Isaac I loved, Esau I hated?
No, I'm not getting into that. What I'm getting to is anything past the right to exist would would basically be up to social construct.
In the Bible, then SMU coach got suspended for conversation with the
Oh,
players.
no, now if you're talking about social rights or constitutional rights,
Oh, but his
Yeah.
comment was that he referenced scripture, and scripture happened to be treat your slaves well and obey your master and, follow the orders of your master and from the context and everything, but he got in trouble for that. And that's speaking about it out of the Bible, and it's like, okay, you have a Methodist university with a coach that get in trouble for quoting scripture.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Yeah,
So-
that's, unfortunately, almost all the seminaries have turned that way too.
I mean, am I wrong in what I'm thinking here?
No, you're not.
Because I mean, beyond those, like, and we do have moral principles, like, so I agree with the moral principles. I'm just not sure as far as rights go. Even Christ, I mean, look, we don't have a right to be free. Even Christ says, look, if you're a slave, be the best slave. Be a slave as though I'm your master. If you're working, work as though you're working for the Lord.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah,
So-
I see what you're saying on that, but, I would say the right to be, like, say, the answer to the right to be free, and then talking about, like, what Paul was talking about, I think that's in, that First Corinthians or Romans, is even though you're in you're in this current situation, you still have the right to have the dignity of being an image bearer of God, and that's your right. And then with us as Christians, that's expressed as in our command to love our neighbor as ourselves. So that right then becomes like our responsibility to love, and then on the contrawise, it's our ability to accept that love. That's a kind of a way to put it, but you're talking about the concept of, say the question again, I'm sorry.
Well, look, it was a statement that was, other than our right to exist, all the other rights we have are that of social construct.
Yeah, well, you're talking about on a naturalist viewpoint?
I'm talking about from.
Even God?
Yeah, I'm talking like from God's viewpoint.
Harold, I'm gonna throw something in the mix.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not so sure, I'm gonna kind of go along with you, that we have human rights other than we're created in the image of God, but we being image bearers of God, and we've got the 10 Commandments, and then, all throughout the Bible, there are commands, there are the words of God that tell us how we are to act toward another person.
And
You've got
I agree with like
Leviticus, you
moral
got,
principles.
and so you got it all through the Bible, so it's maybe not so much the rights that are guaranteed to us, but it's kind of on the other side, is that what people are told to do
others.
to other
Yes,
people?
no, I agree with that.
Responsibilities
Well,
that they have
Exactly.
of flourishing life.
Yes, no, showing the fruits of the Spirit, no, like, do we value life because we're Christians? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Do we believe that babies have a right to live? Absolutely. Does the state?
Okay, here's a question, where do rights emanate from? Even, I know we're gonna say God, it does ultimately.
No, I don't believe rights emanate from God. Other than the right to live,
Okay,
the right to
we're
exist.
missing a step here. Rights emanate due to the value we place as on humans, right? And this value is we're talking about the image bearers of God. But rights are nothing but are, let's say, some sort of a codification of the values that we hold of human dignity.
No, yeah, because that's what for instance, here in the United States, we've been blessed that we can worship God, we can pray, read the Bible and do things. We know God's moral principles, we adhere to his laws as best we can. And because of that, socially, our state and our government, they've extended rights to us. I don't see in the Bible where we have we don't have a right to vote in the Bible. We don't have a right to work 50 years and have these certain rights that we have.
Yeah, you
We have-
mentioned that we have the right to exist, we don't even have that.
It's
If you're talking,
almost-
if you're moving towards like, it's something that's something that God wills upon us, right?
Well, the
God
reason I
is-
state that we have a right to exist is because God values life. We are, like you said, we are image bearers of
Like,
God.
what was the word you used? God blank life.
But God values life.
Yeah, there it is, it's
Farrell?
the value.
Yeah.
We're almost, I think, hitting on something of the idea that because of God and us being the image bearers and us being Christians, basically human rights are brought about because of Christians.
I agree.
Mhm.
No, yeah, and I would agree
So
with that.
we are the instruments of God in
Yes.
human
Can I
rights.
interject?
Absolutely.
There's a middle step that we're missing here.
Yeah,
We
what
talked
is
about earlier, remember the term natural law we talked about?
Mhm.
Okay, so the concept imbued by the government, by the framing of the Constitution, talk about what, even deists hold to a natural law conception. Many atheists still hold to a natural law conception. The idea that these laws are transcendent, they're there, we're just trying to discover them. But some will say they don't emanate from God. Hard to argue that point. But the idea of these natural laws are these transcendent conceptions of the dignity and worth of human beings, and you mentioned it is because it's imbued upon by how God values humans as his most beloved creation. That's the step, is these laws are rooted in the value that God places in us and the value that he expects us to exhibit to each other and treat. He wants us to treat each other as he as he
Yes.
values and respects us. That's where the rights are. We have the modern conception of rights as something that we're owed in a modern society. And in the old days, it meant something more of a responsibility, a duty. We've flipped it, and we've become very entitled in our prosperity in these days. But if you view rights as being something of a responsibility, it's a duty, so it becomes a moral duty, our moral obligation to follow God's moral law. And then it keeps going back, no matter what, no matter how you throw that boomerang, it keeps coming back to God.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree that because of what, I'm just stating that, like, first I see God as like an activist, or, you see what I'm saying?
No,
Like, as far as like, certain right, like, yes, do we have a right, I mean, other than,
You're hitting words that I like here, go ahead, come on.
but other than the right that God has granted us because of the value he puts in life, as image bearers of God,
Yeah.
we have the right to exist, we have the right to live. And some people don't even get, and because we're human, we wanna take that right from certain people.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna say contra-wisely, with the right responsibility dichotomy, we also have the responsibility to live.
Yes,
We have the responsibility to
yeah,
exist.
we have a responsibility, but,
Go ahead.
I think y'all are speaking spiritually, and I understand that. And when we speak about human rights politically, then I agree with you. It's a social issue. Human rights in our concept, human rights in the Middle East, human rights in Russia are
Completely different.
totally different.
Well, if they're different, if you
So
change the
what-
definition of a term, is it the same thing?
So in trying to make it concise in what we're talking about, we're coming from the same idea. But I see that a lot, even in the United States, even in this country, human rights are not always equal. Human rights are not always observed.
Yeah,
It depends on what human you're talking to,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Yeah.
It depends on whether you're talking, what side of the Christian issue you're talking
yeah, so then
about.
we get into like kind of a
See,
tribalistic
that-
debate, yeah.
And that's why when you put it all under one umbrella, it's kind of hard to discuss and it's kind of hard to agree on.
no, because I would agree with him that, because it's the moral principles we live by,
Yes.
we grant others those rights because we're Christians. And we would like to receive those rights because we're Christian.
Yes.
I disagree, I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me finish, because I'm not sure I'm even saying this right. But as far as rights, it's not the right to protest is not a Christian issue. The right to vote is not a Christian issue. The right to own a slave, as long as you treat that slave well, is not a Christian issue.
Okay, can I ask you a question, is our responsibility towards justice an issue?
Yes.
Yeah, cause then you're flipping,
Yes, I would agree that the responsibility for
Yeah.
justice resides with the
Right,
person.
a right and a responsibility are two sides of the same coin when it comes to a moral obligation, kind of like a duty. We're imbued rights in lieu of the responsibilities we have to feed back into this community, the responsibilities we have to be part of a organization larger than
It's
ourselves.
just, but justice doesn't reside with us.
No, it doesn't, but then we're boomerang right back to God, no matter what you're talking about. But you're talking about the idea of rights and responsibilities, how we're to treat each other.
Okay, all right, no, like, I could be wrong, I like, where it says like we affirm, right, I don't.
Yeah, there's a lot, as I'm saying, this is, what we're talking about apologetically is, you've all seen that diagram of, the pictures of a iceberg above water, we're on the part that's sticking up out of the water here. And it goes really deep, but here we go, yes, next slide, therefore, God most likely exists.
Yes.
What
We
was-
made
what
it!
was Miranda gonna say? Miranda, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna speak to your statement, like, we give rights, and I was like, no,